That's it. That's good. 5 people. For those new people, I can't see myself. There I am. Yeah. For those new people, if you're joining us now, it doesn't matter what class you come to. There's no syllabus, and there's no final exam. You can just come in anytime you want. I am recording this. Who knows? You know, you may be sitting at a table and telling your someone about the wonderful history of where Amazon came from, and you forgot a detail. You can go look it up now. You can go look. It'll be on the internet somewhere.
You sound so smart when you look it up.
Well, if you don't have to look it up, you sound even smarter, you know. Well, did you know that, you know, when they was making the Amazon, they blah, blah, blah. If you have to look it up, you're kind of like, yeah, you lost the game. Let's see. Next week, of course, we're going to cover superstitions, a few of them. Basically, a lot of ones I like are the 13th. Why do we not have 13th floors in a lot of places? You know, why is sometimes cats thought of superstitious? Why is walking under ladders? Stuff like that. So let's start off with what is the most used word today in the world? Let me read my notes here. Now, when I say used word, I mean the word that is used in every culture. Japan, Indonesia, I don't know, Australia, everywhere in all the nations of Africa and South America, they use this word, and it's used every day. And I asked my daughter and son-in-law this last night, and they came up, they thought it was a rude word. So I had put it in. It's not a nasty word. It's a noun and a verb, and it permeates every language, which is incredible when you have what, like 400, 500 different languages and maybe 1,000 languages. This word has been picked up and used by everybody. It's used, I don't know, 100, maybe 500 billion times a day. We know it was born in 1998. We know the exact date it was born. And it was born, the word is Google. And you're saying, I knew that, dang it. Google, that's what I wrote at the top there, Google. Okay. And after that, I have a 1 with, I don't know how many zeros. It's supposed to be 100 zeros following that 1. Okay, now, this word officially became a word in 1940. Now, there was a mathematician who, let me see, Edward Kastner, who taught at Columbia University in New York. And one day he was walking with his nephews. Let me admit, Becky, in a park nearby. It was called the, I think they said the Pavilions Woods, New Jersey. Anybody from New York here? No. He was walking with his 2 nephews, Edward and Milton Sherrata, and they were talking. Now, obviously, these guys were smart. These young people. One was 9 years old. I think the other one was 8. But Milton was the one that was 9, and he was a mathematician teaching school, and was having a great deal of trouble showing his younger students, I guess the new freshmen, the difference between a number that's infinite and a number that's really, 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 really big. So he came up with this idea of 1 with 100 zeros following it. And he was asking his nephews, what can we call this thing that will make them remember it? I mean, there are technical terms for it, but he said, don't remember that. I want something that's catchy, that my students can remember this big, 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 big number with 100 zeros. And then Milton came up with the word gogol, Googol, gogol. And later on in the same walk, he came up with gogolplex, which is a gogol of gogols, or gogol to the gogols times power, pardon me. So anyway, And he liked the word Gogol. And at the time there was a, oh, hold on a second. Can y'all talk amongst yourself for a second while I go let the lady in? I'm sorry, I didn't plan this. Think about Gogol. Let me go here. Read up there. Okay, come in. Come on in. And there you are. Hasha. I heard her.
Gold sounds like a Japanese monster.
Godzilla versus Google.
There you go.
It's probably true.
I was thinking of a gargoyle, you know, those figurines inside of buildings.
Hmm.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. And then now we're going to skip to the year 1996. Larry Page and Sergey Brin. You may know those names. That's their picture should be on the wall there. They were two students at Stanford University, and they had come up with a way to search, a new search way looking, that looked at the back pages instead of the old search engines would go through and simply list. If you put in a search for cows, it would go through and start looking at the thing. Oh, hold on a second. I'm sorry. Yes, dear. Okay, I'll pretend everything's fine. Anyway, these two students came up with a thing called Backrub to call their search engine that, but they didn't like that name. It implied that they were using, not implied, they were using a new way of searching that was much quicker than the old way of doing a search. Then they were seated at a room, and Sean, what was it? Sean, yeah, verbally suggested the word Googleplex, which we've mentioned. And then Larry immediately said, no, Gogol, we'll use Gogol, because it's a huge word, and they search a huge number of sites. So Sean turned to his computer and typed in Gogol, but he typed it wrong. Instead of Googol, he typed in Google. Google came up, the domain name was available, and he said, I like it. So they grabbed it. And that is how the word Google.com came into being. At this time, it's worth, I don't know how many billions of dollars. It's a big company. And that's in less than 30 years. Chinese say Google, no, I think the Chinese have their own search engine, by the way. But you know, they're still a communist country, and they can tell them what to do. So they have their own. They didn't like Google, but everybody else uses Google. It's now a verb, and I'm going to Google that or get it on Google. And the ladies here, you know, I can only apologize to you people. I'm sorry. I plan to have a nice quiet hour, but stuff's happening. I'm going to go on to the next page. Here's Edward Kastner, and there's the book he wrote called Mathematics and Imagination. The next one is the word Amazon. Come on in. No. Sit down.
That's called the pros and cons of Zoom.
Why don't you wait a second, honey? Why don't you wait and have another baby? She gets paid by how many people she does, so let's let her keep moving. Now, Amazon, I can't talk about Google. I'm buying back, by the way, without mentioning this other big company called Amazon. Now, I have a picture over here. What do you picture when you hear the word Amazon? Well, I used to picture these tall, strong, and fierce women warriors, lots of muscles, and of course, they all usually had a spear. The term Amazon has been with us for over 3,000 years. The Greeks knew there was warlike women that lived over there in the Caucasus Mountains over there across. They had a lot of colonies. They knew there were these women that were warlike. And what they wrote down in their history was that these women had no use for men except to keep them as slaves to do all the hard work. The women were devoted to fighting, and they were. The Greek name for them means Amazon, means without a breast. I mean, yeah, I guess the implications, I don't believe this, was that they would remove a breast so that they could shoot their arrows more better, or they could throw their spears better, devote anything to be a better warrior. So in this case, the Amazons, they did have enclaves of them around in, like I said, in Europe, not in Greece. And they successfully defended their territory for many years. They've had similar cultures of, quote, Amazon women in Africa, as well as in Upper Greece. Now, let's talk about that big river in South America. We call that the Amazon. Why? Well, this is the longest river in the world. I think it's got the bigger than the Mississippi. The area that it drains is huge. So when it was discovered in, I think, early 15th century, I think that the natives would be quite surprised to hear that it was discovered. Like, whoa, we've known it was there for a long time. But the Spaniards who discovered it, Francisco de Orellana, named it the Rio Santa Maria de la Moleche Dulce, which means the sweet water, Holy Mary of the sweet water, because the river it's fresh water. At the mouth of the Amazon, it's so wide you can't see anything. You think you're at sea, but it's actually fresh water you can drink. So, but he was working his way up the Amazon, trying to find the source, and he did successfully because they had armor. They had this protective thing that had never been seen before. The arrows would bounce off of it. They had I think these early muskets they could fire. So they had superior firepower and everything else until they ran into this tribe. I'm trying to remember the name, the Tulago. No, the Tapuyas Indians. They ran into this coming up the river and they were stopped. They couldn't go anymore. They basically outfought them. And they realized when they looked at the ones that had been slain, they were women. Most of them were women, but a lot of them were fighting alongside their men. But they were impressed by the amazing ferocity of these ladies, these women. And so when he was stopped and he had to admit defeat and go back, he decided to honor them he renamed the river the Amazon in their honor. Say, they beat us, so we're going to go back. Now, when later on, let's skip forward, let's see, 500, 600 years. There's a guy named Jeff Bezos, who came up with what did he come up with? Amazon, pardon me. And he named his new company this Amazon because he foresaw, even when all he sold was books. If y'all remember, he started out just selling books, and he foresaw his company being a huge river where all kind of things would flow out to the world. He said this was his vision from the very beginning, that he was starting with books, but ultimately they were going to sell everything, and it was going to be a river flowing out to the world. And that's why he named it the Amazon company. Pardon me, this is my cat. My baby. Hey, buddy. One of my cats. Okay. Shibang. We usually refer to the whole shebang. I don't know if you do, but I used to. The whole shebang. We mean that it's a lot, or the entire thing. The word itself is believed to come from the Irish word shebeen. Well, this is appropriate. Yeah. Shebeen, which was an unlicensed or illegal drinking establishment of old. As this particular type of speakeasy was known for its brawls and fights, it was said that a drunken Irishman could often be heard saying, "I can beat the whole shebeen." How's that for an accent? I don't do Irish accents, but I can see I can beat the whole shebeen, and thus everybody would pile on, and from that we got the word the whole shebang. Pardon me, it got languid. I really don't do accents. I can't do Irish or English. I can do a little girl, but I can't do any of those. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you're gonna like this one too. This is called son of a gun. I used to think son of a gun would be just a euphemism, like I put on here, for another phrase, with not so nice. But this phrase actually predates this other phrase. To be called a son of a gun was simply to be called illegitimate, because women were allowed to be on some sailing ships. On a lot of sailing ships, especially the military ones, they were thought to be highly dangerous, suspicious, superstition about having women on board. But on your normal sailing ships that had guns, your merchants, they would let the women come on board. You got a wife? Come on, and all other kind of women too. The children that were born on board ship were more than often we're not, pardon me. Yes. Yes.
We need a gown.
And I'm going to get her a gown. So a son of a gun meant that you were born like between the two guns on the ship. You were the son of a gun. Hey, we got your gowns. We got all kinds of gowns.
Oh, yes, sir.
Here you go. How about this one? Freshly laundered, I think.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Okay. To steal someone's thunder means to preempt or to draw attention away from someone else's achievements in favor of your own. He stole my thunder. If you're going to tell a joke and somebody knows it and tells it before you, they're going to steal your thunder. Well, where did this come from? It came from the theater, the same place that so many of the phrases, break a leg, wing it, so many slapstick, all come from the theater. And I'm going to be doing hypocrite. You're gonna be surprised to hear where hypocrite comes from. It comes from the theater. But English dramatist John Dennis invented a gadget for imitating the sound of thunder, and he introduced it into a play in 1709. Now that's a long time ago. So his play, you could hear, I hear the thunder, and you could hear the thunder going on stage. He invented that. Basically what it is, it's a big sheet of tin that you waggle. My daddy had a hardware store. We used to take up those big sheets of tin and waggle them. You make this wonderful wah 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 noise. Anyway, he used this in his play, but the play flopped. It was a play called Opus and Virginia, but it only ran, I think, 1 or 2 performances before they shut it down. Now, and it was replaced by Macbeth, by the way, ironically enough. Now, Dennis himself went to the opening night of this new Macbeth play, and he was sitting in there when he heard somebody using his machine to make that noise. And he stood up in the theater and shouted, "Damn them, they will not let my play run, but they will steal my thunder." And that was a wonderful quote. And it got around London and it got printed. And from that, we have this phrase still today, just steal my thunder. Now, 1700, 18, 19, 20, I don't know, what, that's 300-400 years? Long time, folks. That's been around a lot longer than Google. 3 sheets to the wind. Now, the nautical term sheet means a rope or a chain, because, you know, some of those vessels were huge and they had to have chains to hold the bottoms of the sails taut, and they would turn the sails like that to catch the wind a little better. So the sheet refers to the chains or the rope. Now, by pulling or letting out on these ropes, you can control the angle of the angle of the sail. Now, with the winds come from this way, you want it to move it this way. On our very windy days, sailors often loosened these 3 main sheets because it was too much. It was gonna blow the ship over. So they loosened it and let the wind spill out. And the result, you had this sailing vessel with the sails just flapping and flopping all over in the breeze, in the storm. Right? Somebody just came in, Bobby. And from that phrase, it reminded them of someone who was drunk, trying to walk and flopping all over the place. So from 3 sheets to the wind, our sailing phrase, we get this one. I think people still use that. Hold on. I'm being paid. All I can say is, I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am. Okay, well, thanks again. We'll see you. Take your chain. Take your necklace. You're welcome. If you have anybody else want one, let me know. Bum, ba-dum, bum, bum. Now, we covered this the last time, the whole 9 yards. Let's refresh your memory about comes from the 27 feet of ammunition belt. I'm assuming we covered this last time. Did we? Raise your hand.
Wait,
I see Donnie shaking her head. Yes, that's a yes. Okay, yes. Oh, okay. For those people that may not, I can't see anything, Kathy. You're blocked out.
I came
Um,
She
late,
doesn't
so
have
I
her
don't know.
mic on.
I
or
wasn't here last week.
her thing. Let me put my headphones on. The whole 9 yards, for those that weren't here, comes from the World War II fighters that later in the war, when we had the longer range fighters, they used 50 caliber machine guns, and the ammunition belt was about 9 yards long, 27 feet, and they had to be loaded with big 50 caliber things. So when a pilot would shoot and give the whole 9 yards at an enemy, they were giving everything they got. After that, they were out of ammo. So that's where we got the phrase from. Yeah, boop-a-doop-a-doop. Wild goose chase. Have you ever been sent off on a wild goose chase? I'm just killing myself here with light. I have people people take perverse pleasure in sending new people out to do things like, like go get me a left-handed monkey wrench or whatever. And you go off looking and you look like an idiot and they're all laughing at you. A wild goose chase. Meaning, so I see somebody saying yes. So, Englishmen, this is where it comes from. In the 16th century, they invented a kind of horse race. You can read along with me here, called the wild goose chase, in which you can imagine how dangerous this was. Some guy, or man, or whatever, on a horse, would start off. Everybody else was gathered there waiting, and then he would go whatever way he wanted. If he wanted to jump over a fence, go under a tree, go around a bush, run out into the woods, wherever he went, everyone had to follow exactly the route that he took. And they called it a wild goose chase. And at first, it meant figuratively meant an erratic course taken by one person and followed by another. And Shakespeare used it like that. But later, the common term's origins were forgotten, and a wild goose chase came to mean a pursuit of something that can never be caught. Because I can only imagine how dangerous this was to have people jumping over fences, going where they didn't know where they were going, and having people blindly follow you on horses. I was on a horse several times, and I don't want to do it again. It's scary. I mean, you high up off the ground, and I had no control of this animal. And I'm thinking, and it would go underneath the trees and almost knock my head off. Y'all are laughing, but it happened. I was a young boy. I haven't been on a horse since then. You see, I'm still alive. Good thing I'm short. But really, that horse went. Anyway, it's the feeling of not being in control. But a wild goose chase comes to us from that game, which sounds interesting, but probably resulted in thousands of injuries. Okay, guys, balls to the wall. Now, this means to give it everything you've got, to do the absolute maximum possible. Go balls to the wall. Now, there's nothing naughty about this saying, which a long time ago I thought there was. The expression comes once again to us from the world of the military and the military aviation. Many planes control sticks are topped with a ball-shaped type thing like that, and one of them is the throttle. And to get maximum power, you have to push it all the way forward, all the way to the front of the cockpit. Now, the front of the cockpit has something called a firewall. The firewall, of course, was built to keep the engine, if it caught on fire, from coming back into the pilot. So you push that ball all the way to the front. And then if you pushed another ball on your left here, let's say, which joystick, if you push it forward, it's going to send that plane right down into a dive. So what you have is a plane going maximum speed, as fast as it'll go, balls to the wall. Both of them are pushed up against the wall. That's where we get that phrase from. It's simply the equivalent of pedal to the metal. But it's a cute phrase. I like it. I don't use it very much because people misinterpret it. Baker's dozen. Okay, 13 instead of 12. Why would we say a baker's dozen is that? In ancient times, and I'm not talking recent, I'm talking Egyptians, Etruscans, Babylonians, they had severe penalties for short waiting their customers. In ancient Egypt, they were sometimes nailed to the door of their shops when they were caught selling light loaves. I mean, the loaves didn't contain the weight that it was supposed to have. Thus, when English Parliament passed a law in 1266, subjecting the company of white bakers and company of brown bakers to strict regulations regarding bread weight, the bakers made sure that they complied by it was very difficult, of course, to have exactly the right weight. So they would add extra bread or extra thing of bread to the customer service to be sure that they gave them what they wanted and a lot and a little bit more. So instead of 12, they would give them 13. It would guarantee that there wasn't going to be nailed to the door. Now, it wasn't the English that did this. That was the Egyptians. So that led to the phrase, a baker's dozen. Cool. Oh, which got me to thinking, as I was working on this a couple of weeks ago, I got to thinking about the po' boy. The po' boy. And I was explaining to Kathy or somebody earlier that I used the phrase when I ordered my po' boy to say I want the whole 9 yards, and meaning I want the tomatoes and the pickles and the onions and the lettuce and the gravy and everything. Put it all on there. Pork chop if you got it. So where did this come from? It was invented in New Orleans by Clovis and Denny Martin. Now I've bought a po' boy. They call them the Martins, but I know they closed their shop, but I bought them down there. Just like I bought a muffalata down there in the place where they invented that. In the 1930s, during the Great Depression, a lot of people had little money, and sometimes even for food. Times were tough, and the streetcar conductors and drivers of New Orleans were not being paid. There was some problem. I suppose it was cash flow. They weren't getting any money. Well, they went on a long strike in 1929 to protest this. But of course, that didn't bring any money in. It just made them protesting. Now, two brothers, Clovis and Dennis Martin, had been streetcar conductors for many years, but they had left, saved up, and they had bought themselves this little shop. It was a small restaurant and a coffee stand on St. Claude and Touro Street, if you know where that is in New Orleans. And they were inspired to help their fellow conductors. They said, what can we do to help these people? So to help these hungry strikers and their families, they would provide a sandwich. They said it's going to fill up a man's body. And if you get a bigger one, it'll fill up their family's tummy too. The first one would be sold for a nickel. The second will be a dime. Basically, it was simply the same sandwich twice. Now, originally, they used a French bread. Now, if you've seen French bread, it has these pointed ends on it. And they soon found out that those pointed ends simply didn't make a good sandwich. It's too much waste. It narrows down too little. So they went to see a friend of theirs, a baker called John Gendoza, and asked him to develop a loaf with bread that would be kind of flattish, roundish on the ends, and be about 30 inches long, and put less dough in it so we have more place to put the fillings. And he went off and he did this, and he baked a 30-inch loaf, less dough, and ends that were rounded, so more filling could be used. Now, the sandwich, when he gave it to him, was a big success. They started out ordering 500 loaves daily to produce 100 sandwiches. But shortly, they were making and selling 9,000 po' boy sandwiches a day. And then it didn't take long at all. In 6 months, all of New Orleans was saying, wow, this is good stuff. You can make a sandwich with all kind of stuff in there. So when you think about it, the loaf of a po' boy is different from a French bread. And technically, it should be, I guess, 15 inches, but they're a lot shorter than that now. It's probably the most consumed sandwich in New Orleans. And we have places here in Baton Rouge called New Orleans po' boys. I don't know, but it's good. Now, the same type of thing was done up in New York and other places. They call them hoagies and things like that. But that's where this one came from. Came from New Orleans. That place is not there right now. The Martins po' boy shop. It closed. I guess they got tired making them po' boys. I didn't put the muffalata in here, but as you know, or may not know, the French Quarter was at one time mostly Italian. And at the same time, the Italians were seeing this po' boy. They came up with this round thing that they designed called the muffalata. Forget the name of the restaurant. It was like a
Central.
Central. Yeah, okay, Central. Okay, it was Central Bakery or Central Groceries. It was like they sold all kind of Italian groceries, and they came up with this big round thing, and they put everything in it too. And I don't know if it was how much it sold for or anything because I haven't researched it, but the muffalata came out about that same time. A muffalata is a lot of food. They put cheese and olives and and then they coated with olive oil. Oh, gee. Yeah, it's sort of rich. Well, which leads me to sandwich. Look at that beautiful sandwich. Now, we call these things sandwiches. This is something almost everybody knows, but I put it in here anyway, because a gentleman named John Montague, he was the 4th Earl of Sandwich. I guess Sandwich is a family, what do you call that? Estate in England. Anyway, he was the 4th Earl of Sandwich, and his years were from 1718 to 1792. And John Montague had a lot of money, but he loved gambling. He gambled all the time, well, as much as he could. And he refused to leave the gambling table to eat when he was at his own home. Had all people around him, they were just gambling away. He didn't want to go stop to eat. So he said, tell my cook to send me just some roast beef and put it between some bread so I can eat while I'm playing. And they did. And from that, we get this word sandwich. Now, few people know that he was very interested in naval affairs. And to honor the Earl's commitment to the sea, Captain James Cook, named a group of islands in the Pacific Ocean, the Sandwich Islands, after him. Nowadays, we call them Hawaii, but at the time, those were the Sandwich Islands, the 4th Earl of Montague. Okay, this next phrase is something that I used to hear a lot. Don't fly off the handle. In fact, I heard this not directed to me, but to other people. The phrase I heard the most was, Philip, stop wool gathering. To get me to come back to whatever the teacher was talking about. But don't fly off the handle. That is to get very angry and maybe even violent. I don't know. Don't fly off the handle. Okay, where do we get this from? When you're talking to somebody and you see somebody getting angry and you tell them don't fly off the handle, this is a warning. We give them that, watch out, you're getting dangerous. We want them to maintain control, to keep their temper. Now, don't fly off the handle, Fred. We'll get your car out the river. And Junior said he was sorry. The phrase comes to us from the American frontiermen who spent many hours a day chopping down trees. America was mostly trees. Now, the axe that they used, of course, was homemade until machines started doing it. But at the time, keeping these heavy head on the head of the heft, whatever it is, was difficult. I mean, you had to have this heavy axe that could chop a tree, and yet it had to stay on there with a lot of force. So they had a lot of ways of binding it on and crimping it on. They'd put wedges in, but still it was difficult. So many times these homemade axes they'd swing and that axe head would just go flying off. And if you were in its way, you would be severely damaged. I can imagine getting hit by that, smashing anyone. So now when a person loses their temper, they can cause great damage. And thus we get this phrase, don't fly off the handle, reminiscent of the early men just chopping away and watching that axe handle go, axe head. There's a name for all that, but I don't know what they are. Heft, handle. Well, once again, This led me to having an axe to grind. Someone with an axe to grind is not carrying around an axe that they want to sharpen. As you know, you have to sharpen iron tools. They have to be put on a grindstone and sharpened very frequently. Nowadays, we have this type of tempered steel that hardly ever requires it. In fact, they're hard to sharpen now, but at the time you had to sharpen your tool. Our daddy told me every day at the end of work, you got to be sure your tool's sharpened. So this phrase comes to us, it comes from a story. There was a man, he walked up to a boy and he said, young man, I have an axe here. Are you strong enough to turn that grindstone? I don't think you're strong enough. And the boy said, oh yeah, I can do that. And he started turning that grind. And the man, sharpened his axe. And he kept going. He didn't tell him to stop. He kept, oh, you're doing a great job. And so after a long time, the man had finished sharpening his axe. He took it and he left, didn't even thank him. So from this phrase, which people think comes from Benjamin Franklin, but it didn't, we get this phrase of someone that has an agenda. He's got an axe to grind, meaning he or she has something that they want done and they want you to do it. And they're not going to be grateful about it. They don't, but they're not going to pay you. They just want you to do it. They have an axe to grind. Good. So that's where that phrase comes from. It's a story told by a man named Charles Miner, but he used his pseudonym. Pseudonym was Poor Richard, so they thought it came from Benjamin Franklin, but it didn't. Okay. Oh, I gotta hurry up. By hook or by crook. I'm gonna get that by hook or crook. I'm gonna do that by hook or crook. I'll bet you at some time in your life, you've used this phrase. I know my mama did. Looking back, I can see my mother used a lot of these phrases. I don't know why there's a 6 after the crook. I guess I didn't spell it right. Okay. But by hook or crook means to achieve something by whatever means can be found. If you intend to do something by hook or crook, you are determined not to let anything stop you from doing it. You're going to get it. So this phrase is very old. They say it comes from the 1300s or before, but that's when the laws were passed. In the forests of medieval England, the manor, the lords, and the king didn't like the fact that the people were starting to go in there and take their game. The people can starve, but they're not going to come into our forests and take our stuff, which belongs to me. So they passed laws saying that no one could go take any game out of these forests. And then they had to pass a thing because people were cutting down trees. Nope, nobody can cut down any tree in our forest. We don't care if you freeze to death. That's your problem. It's my forest. So, but they did give them one concession. They said that if you can, I'm sorry, I have it all written out there. If you can pick up the dead wood, yeah, that's okay. You can carry off the dead wood or the dead branches. There's a tree with a dead branch. And they said, yay, a shepherd's crook is got a hook in it. So if you're a shepherd and you can reach up and pull down a branch and it comes down, obviously it's dead. You can have that. So, and there was also something known as a reaper's bill hook, which was also kind of long. But obviously, people who are cold and they want firewood are not going to be satisfied. They're going to have a crook that's maybe 12 feet long. They're going to cheat and get anything they can to go cook their food or to warm themselves up. And from that, we get this phrase, I'm going to get it by hook or by crook. Crow's next. If anybody in here has been a sailor, Don't raise you can raise your hand if you want. I've never been a sailor. I've been on sailing ships, but I've never been a sailor. I can't figure out the bow, the starboard, and the larboard. You know where the word starboard comes from? It's, well, I'm gonna tell you that. The starboard, when ships were sailed early, very early, before the 900s, they had a big plank that would be in the back that would be stuck in to steer the ship. It was um, a steering board, that would be used, and it was always on, I think, on the left side. So this, from the word steering board, came the word starboard. Now we call it starboard, meaning the steering side. And the other side was the dock side. Well, was where you get up against the dock. Okay. That was at a side note. I won't charge you for that. Crow's nest. Now, in all the sailing stories that I've read, I've read all the stories by O'Brien and everything. I love sailing, reading about it, but I'm not good on boats. My stomach ain't that good. But a crow's nest is that little way up at the top, the bucket kind of you think of at the top, and the guy at the sail ho, or there she blows, if it's a whaling ship. So the crow's nest, why do we call it a crow's nest? Aha. Because the raven or crow was an essential part of the Norsemen and Vikings navigational equipment. They brought them with them. They would have cages of crows and ravens. Yeah, real birds. Now these birds were carried on board to prevent, whoops, I forgot where the point is, when you can't see where the shore is, when you're out in the middle of somewhere, and there's a fog, or you don't know where you are, or you don't know where the nearest shore is, and they hadn't invented radar yet, what you do is you let a bird go that's going to go straight for the nearest land, because birds seem to know. And so they would look where the bird was going, and they would plot the course to go that way, because it would lead them inevitably toward land. They carry these birds in a cage tied way at the top of the mast, and later on, as the ships grew and the lookout stood his watch, in a tub, the name crow's nest was given to this tub. While today's Navy still uses lookouts, the crow's nest is a thing of the past. They don't have that up there anymore. But at one time, they used real birds, because we didn't know where we were. Get out on the ocean, I mean, it all looks the same, doesn't it? I mean, it's anywhere you look, it looks like water to me. Yep, water this way too. I like that one. That's cool. It's a very, very old phrase that everybody seems to know about now, but I'm going to cover it anyway. Mad as a hatter. We don't wear this too much these days, but it's still a good phrase. It's the most probable origin of this phrase. Oh dear. Okay. Is not what most people think it comes from Alice in Wonderland. If you know in Alice in Wonderland, there's this, the Mad Hatter, the Tea Party, and his Mad Hatter. That's not where it comes from, because Lewis Carroll knew this phrase long before it was in use, long before he used it. And it comes from this probable origin is that the hat making trade in the 1700s and 1800s, there was milliners would have what they call felted hats with, they would felt it with mercuric oxide, a chemical compound. Unaware that mercury fumes were poisonous, the milliners wore no protective clothing. Now, over time, the fumes got up into their nervous system and their brain, ate away thing. They would lose their teeth. They couldn't remember anything. Their eyesight went bad, and they acted crazy on death. So from that phrase, they'd say, look at that, he's crazy. Yeah, well, he's mad as a hatter. They knew there was a connection. They just didn't know what the connection was, which brings you to wonder, what do we do now that we're going to look back on and say, oh, gee, that was horrible. We did that and it destroyed us. We should never have used Wi-Fi, because Wi-Fi really does eat your brain. I don't know. who knows when we're going to find out that radio waves, I don't know, do weird things. We don't know. I'm sure they'll look back in a century and say, gee, never should have done that stuff. Another old phrase that I've covered before, but I love it, is the word dumbbells. Why do we call them dumbbells? Now, if there's anybody here that doesn't know this, no, I'm going to cover it anyway, because I like to talk about it. Look at those dumbbells over on the side there. They've got these big weights on them. I couldn't even lift those. I used 2 pounds. And then there's some bells right next to them. Is there a connection between weightlifting or exercise equipment and bells? Yes, there is. They're directly connected. You may remember last class I talked about the bell tower, how it moved from a war tower and became be hanging bells in it, and then finally it came to be we called it a clock because it means bell. So sometime during the 8th century, the 700s, church towers began to be built to contain hanging bells, I guess. Now, the bells themselves just got bigger and bigger, and larger size bells allowed the inhabitants of the towns and hamlets to hear the bell ringing. It, okay, we're going to have a service. I have a note here that says at Canterbury in the Middle Ages, which would be 1300s, there were 24 men required to ring one bell. I guess because it was just too big. So they were difficult to ring, and bell ringing required a lot of practice to get that swing right. So a device was consistent, and it was a rope thing suspended from a rope, a weight. It would go, it wasn't a bell, and people could pull on that. Now, what the rich young men noticed at the time was that the bell ringers developed these big shoulders and arms and biceps. They were getting stronger and bigger. I'm sure the young women noticed that too. And so the rich young men said, well, I want to get that. How can I get that? And they say, aha, I don't have bells, but what I can do is I can build in my manor a pulley with a rope to it and heavy weight, and I could pull on that and get that same exercise. And that's what they did. They started building these things, and many manors and church places had these built into their homes as an form of exercise. It was a pulley with a weighted rope, which he would pull as though he were ringing a church bell. And they call these bells, even though there was no bell there. And then they said, well, there's no sound, so it's a dumbbell, meaning it's dumb, doesn't make any noise. And everybody called these then dumbbells. And then another bright person, maybe another 50 years, realized I don't have to put a rope and a pulley. I could just pick these things up without that. Genius. And so they started just having a bar with some weights attached to it, and the name stuck as dumbbell. We call them that today. I love how names stick. You dumbbell. I guess not gonna do that. Happy as a clam. The strange phrase to be happy as a clam is really a clipped version of the original saying, which was to be happy as a clam at high tide. The reason is that humans like to eat clams. And so do a lot of birds and animals. And you do this by digging them from their little homes. They have a home in the sand. Okay. Now, a salmon that's being steamed to death to make a delicious chowder is not a happy clam. No. So one that has avoided being dug up and eaten is a happy clam. So since high tide is when people can't go out and dig them up, and when tide's high, they're covered. So happy as a clam at high tide. And I guess it should be a phrase, sad as a clam at low tide. I'm guessing. I don't know, but that makes sense. Oh, put a sock in it. Put a sock in it. Whoops. When we tell somebody to put a sock in it, we tell them they're too loud to shut up or to be quiet. The phrase comes from the age of the gramophone with that great big horn. I'm glad I found a picture, by the way. And that there was no volume control. So if it was just too loud, they would put a sock in it and it would turn down the volume. Makes sense to me. It's a lot of things, like in radio when, well, I'm not going to go with the radio phrases of on the button, on the nose. All of those come from radio. Lick it into shape. When we are given a project and must lick it into shape, or a coach says, my players are new, but I'll lick them into shape. We all know what they mean. It means to take something disorganized or chaotic and get it into some sort of organization. But why do we say lick it into shape? I'm not going to start licking things with my tongue. I have several projects that are very disorganized and I'm not going to lick them. And yet we use this phrase. It comes to us. What comes to us? Okay. From the belief by ancient naturalists, Pliny the Elder, that bears, see those big animals down there? Those, when they're first born, they were just like a little tiny lump of amorphous nothing, flesh. And that somehow their mother gradually licks them, and then they turn into the shape of a bear. And then from this belief, we get the meaning to take a formless object and lick it into shape. Now, that's a long time to go back, but you may say to yourself, why didn't we know? Why did National Geographic send a cameraman into the den to film it and see what actually happens? That's not true. Well, National Geographic wasn't around at the time, and nobody was brave enough to crawl into a bear's den to find out, especially a mama bear's den. So we have that phrase, to lick into shape. That's the last one I got time for. To the bitter end. I'm going to stick with you guys to the bitter end. Yes, even if y'all don't want to watch me. It means the person will persevere with something until it's finished, no matter how unpleasant, no matter how difficult, no matter how bad it goes. I'm going to stick with you to the bitter end. Now, it's a nautical term. I have a picture of bits right there. I'm pointing to my screen. It's usually plural because bits are on a ship are double because you can wrap a rope around each one of them, like in the figure 8. Now, alternatively, they might take a turn of a line around the bits to control the rate at which they're paying it out, meaning they have a rope going up to a block and pulley and they're letting it out slowly. Now bits are a standard piece of equipment. When a chain or a rope is what they call paid out to the bitter end, that means there's no more left. The last bit is tied onto the bit, and that's it. There's nothing left to go. All the rope's gone. Hence, we use this phrase, I'm going to be with you to the bitter end. And I'm going to be with you guys to the bitter end. But I've got to go now, folks. That's all, folks. Next week, we'll take up superstitions, and we'll take up, whatever. Okay. I hope y'all have a wonderful day. I'm going to go take care of my darling bride. And bye-bye. Thanks again for joining me.
Hi, Phil. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
How do I end this? Oh, there he is.